The armies of Israel are encamped on one side of the valley of Elah. The armies of the Philistines are encamped on the other side of the valley of Elah. By the valley of Ephesdammim, it says. By Soka and Azekah. Now you feel better, you know exactly where they're at. And the Philistines are sending out their champion every day, Goliath. 10 foot tall. Not Manute Bull. Not a big skinny guy. 10 foot tall Mike Tyson. 10 foot tall Hulk Hogan. An athlete, a champion. 800 pounds. A monster. Coat of mail made of bronze that weighs 175 pounds. Those little scales, you know, that they would wear for arrows and swords and spears. A bronze helmet. Someone to carry his shield. A brass javelin down his back. A sword on his side. A spear, it says, that's like a weaver's beam, like the beam on a big loom. It says the head of the spear weighed 20 pounds. The rest of the spear then had to balance that. So we're talking about throwing a spear that weighs 40 to 50 pounds. You don't want to get hit with that. He's walking out into the valley every day and he's saying, "You're the armies of Saul. I'm with the Philistines. Instead of bringing our armies to battle, let's do it this way. I'll be the champion of the Philistines. You send out a man from Israel. We'll do battle. If he beats me and kills me, then the Philistines will be your servants for the rest of their lives. If I beat him and kill him, then the children of Israel will be our servants for the rest of their life." And he does it every day for 40 days, morning and evening. David's 3 older brothers are there in the battle. David's the youngest of the 8 boys. And his dad sends him to the front with food for his brothers to find out what's going on. Jesse's worried about his sons. David comes into the camp and says, as he gets in there, just so happens, one of those biblical coincidences, Goliath comes out into the valley. Chink, chink, chink. What'd this guy sound like walking? Imagine a guy here twice as tall as me with all of this armor hanging all over him. And makes this challenge, I defy the armies of Israel. It says all of the men of Israel, they fled and they're standing back. David says, who is this big mouth? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? He comes around here shooting his mouth off, defying the armies of the living God. And they say, David, look, Saul's put a bounty on him. Anybody who goes to battle and defeats Goliath, Saul will enrich him. He'll give him his daughter to marry, which is no prize. That might have kept some men from going to battle. We're going to meet her later. I think Saul was taking opportunity to unload more than money. Probably figured only somebody who can kill a giant is going to be able to handle her. He'll give him his daughter, and his family will be tax exempt in Israel, not have to pay taxes anymore. That's always good. David says, run that by me again? This is the motivation? Tax exemption, wealth, and her? What about the reputation of the living God? What about the God that parted the Red Sea? What about the God that gave us victory over Amalek? What about the God that parted the Jordan River? What about his glory? His older brother, down in verse 28, Eliab, his eldest brother, heard, 17:28, when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. He said, why did you come here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride, the naughtiness of your heart. You're come down here that you might see the battle, like people slowing down to see an accident all the time, cause a huge traffic jam. They want to see if there's blood. He says, I know why you're here. You just come down to see the battle. You're a little sicko. Just rebukes him. David said, what have I done now? Sounds like brothers, doesn't it? Isn't there a cause? Is there something just here? And he turns away and spoke to another one, the same manner. The people answered him in the same way. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. David said unto Saul, let no man's heart fail him because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth. He's a man of war from his youth. David said to Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep. There came a lion and a bear, took a lamb out of the flock. I went after him, smote him, delivered him out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, slew him. Amazing kid. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine, he's just going to be like one of them, seeing that he's defied the armies of the living God. Now, there's a big contrast here between Saul and David. Saul's almost 7 foot tall. He's the king. The army's figuring, hey, if he won't go out and fight him, why should we? Saul knows he's sinned. Samuel said, you're losing your kingdom. Saul's backsliding. He's got no confidence. He's got no faith. There isn't anything that's telling him, I can go out here and depend on the Lord. Saul believes in the God of Israel. He knows he's done great exploits in the past. He believes there's messianic promises. But David is standing on the battlefield that day with the living God. God was alive in his life there and then. And that's the big difference between him and Saul. David said, moreover, notice verse 37, this was his confidence, it was the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear. I couldn't do that by myself. He will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, well, go, and the Lord be with thee. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head. And he also armed him with his coat of mail. You know, it's like putting a size 52 on somebody that wears a size 32. And David girded his sword upon his armor and tried to walk. He essayed to go, but forget it. It was too heavy. He couldn't even move, because he had not proved it. He wasn't familiar. And David said unto Saul, I can't go with your armor. With these I haven't proved them. And David took them off. So he took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even a scrip, and his sling was in his hand. And he drew near to the Philistine. Take note of that. David goes down to the brook of Elah, which is in the center of the valley. I've been there many times. This stone is one of the other 5 stones that he didn't use. I got it right down there. That's where this is from. One year I brought back enough for a whole 2nd grade class. My suitcase weighed about 150 pounds, but that's where this is from. The Valley of Elah has gotten deeper because over the last 15 trips with Calvary Chapel, everybody takes stones out of the Valley of Elah. It's going down. We're going to hit oil soon. The interesting thing to note is David had no ammunition until he was fully committed. The brook was at the bottom of the valley where the giant was. His commitment was fully made before he had any equipment, had any supplies. We hear so many times, oh, I'd love to make a commitment, but I don't have what I need. I don't have the tools. I don't have the stuff. I don't have the equipment. I don't have the supplies. David's commitment was complete before he even had any ammo. Goes down, takes 5 smooth stones out of the, and here's this giant glistening in the sun, 40 days, day and night he's come out. Send me a man, mocking the manhood of Israel. Now he comes out this day, ching, 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 and here comes this little kid running out with a stick, and he's picking up stones. You're thinking, you're going to give me one of those sticks and stones will break my bones things, aren't you? What are you doing here? The Philistine came and drew near to David, and the man that was bearing his shield before him. The Philistine looked about and saw David, and he disdained him. He was but a youth and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said, Fee, fi, fo, hum. The Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves, with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods, by the gods of the Philistines. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me. I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and the beasts of the field. And Eliab's probably thinking, oh, that is going to kill me. Then said David to the Philistine, Hey, You came to me with a sword, with a spear, with a shield. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. I can imagine God on the throne going, yes! You know, in 2 Chronicles it's written, and no doubt this is very fresh news when that was written, and in the minds of many still, the eyes of the Lord go to and fro throughout the earth, looking for those whose hearts are perfect towards him, that he might show himself strong on their behalf. David was the exemplary picture of that. You come to me with a sword and a shield. I come to you in the name of the living God. Verse 46, this day will the Lord deliver you into my hand, and I'm going to smite you and take your big fat head from off of you. And I'll give the carcasses of the whole army of the Philistines this day to the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the field. Here's why. This is what's in David's heart. That all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Yes, God says again. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth, not with sword or spear, for the battle belongs to the Lord, and he will give you into our hands. Let me tell you something. The battle's already won. There's no question. God could never forsake this kid. You know, here's the whole army of Israel on one hand standing there listening to, he's out of his mind. You know, this is your crazy brother that sings with the guitar to the sheep, right? Is that, you know, and on the other side of the, you know, and to any observer, this is not combat, this is murder. This is a giant. This is like somebody from the WBC, you know, Hulk Hogan, some giant guy, and you send a 4-year-old kid in the ring with him. And so everybody's like, yeah. But David only knows one giant. That's his God. He knows no other giant. All this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword or shield. The battle belongs to the Lord. He will deliver you into our hands. And it came to pass when the Philistine, now he's mad, he arose and he drew near to David, that David hurried and ran to him. This guy's not seen this in his whole life. 10 foot tall. He's used to seeing people scatter, hide behind rocks, take dirty shots at him. He's got a little skinny kid in front of him now, and David starts running at him. Ah! You know, just running at him. I love this. He ran to the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and he took from there a stone, and I love this, and he slang it. See, and Goliath, he should have stayed in bed. He got slanged. He slang it, and the stone, and smote the Philistine in his forehead. The stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell to the earth. Now, I got news for you. There was nowhere else that stone was going to go. David was down there. The living God was all over David. And Goliath's yelling, and God's probably saying, just throw it so I can kill the giant. You know, there was nowhere else it could go. David could have just went, yeah, and shot it up in the air, and it would have came down from space and killed him. David could have threw it the wrong way. It would have went around the world and hit Goliath in the back of the head. He could have thrown it to the ground. It would have ricocheted and killed him, hit him in the head. There was nowhere else that stone was going, because that was the last brushstroke on the picture. That was the end. That was the finish line. That's what we focus on, but that was nothing. That was the end of the whole picture. It says here that Goliath falls to the earth. You can see him fall on his knees, ka-chunk, and then on his face, boom. And the Philistine army probably said, oh, that kidder, that Goliath, he's going to grab the kid by the ankles and go boom, 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 boom. And I'm sure the armies of Israel were saying, get out of there before he gets up. He's going to be mad. David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling, with a stone, smote the Philistine, slew him. There was no sword in David's hand. Therefore David ran, stood upon the Philistine. Imagine this, both armies are. David climbs up on top of him. He's laying there on his face, pulls out his sword, and slew him, cut off his head. Now, the Philistine army's got a much different perspective, and this is hard to recoup from once your head's cut off. And it says they take off for the hills. And now the armies of Israel are real brave. Verse 52. Well, we want to take note that sometimes it just takes one to ignite the whole. The men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until they came to the valley and the gates of Ekron. They wounded the Philistines till they fell down on the way of Sa'arim, even to Gath and Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines. They spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine, brought it to Jerusalem, put his armor in his tent, mounted it on the wall, had the head of a bear, head of a lion, head of a giant over his mantle. No, I'm just kidding. But he walks around with it for a couple days. That is really amazing. Now, we're familiar with this. God didn't give it to us so that we can say, oh, I love that story. That David and Goliath story is one of my favorite stories. I'm going to go home and read it to my kids today. That's not why he gave it to us. A good friend of mine here gave me an SAS survival manual. British Special Forces. And so much of what depends on survival is preparation. What takes place before the battle? What takes place ahead of time? The Bible is our SAS manual. It's our survival book for this world. Because every one of our lives at some point is going to go straight through 1 Samuel 17. And everyone in this room faces Goliath in one form or another. Some giant. Sometimes it's a fear. Sometimes it's a habit. Sometimes it's a memory, a broken heart, a sin, a temptation. Some giant that comes and mocks us morning and evening, day after day. It's interesting, the word Goliath means to exile, to send someone into exile. It means to strip them naked and embarrass them in front of their enemies. It means to, when spoil was taken and it was paraded in front of in defeat. That's what the word Goliath means. And that's what the Goliaths in our lives want to do to us. Exile us, strip us naked, embarrass us. Take those things that we're struggling with, and I have Goliaths in my life. All of us do. The interesting thing is it tells us in verse 1, and we dig a little and find these things, that it takes place at Eves Dammon. Eves Dammon is the boundary of blood. And you see, Satan, that's as far as he can come to our lives, is to the boundary of blood. He has no right to us. If the enemies of God and Satan had no right to God's people in the Old Testament under the Old Covenant, he doesn't stand a chance under a better covenant in the New Testament. We're sealed with the Spirit of promise to the day of redemption. And sometimes spiritual warfare and the enemy is presented in such a way, if you don't have this book, if you don't have these tapes, if you don't read this, you'll get defeated, you won't be able to beat the enemy. Oh, cut me a break. There's the boundary of blood. You're bought with a price. The evil one comes, he touches us not. And we spend our whole lives trying to convince ourselves of how big God is and how big his love is, and he really is big. And we spend the rest of our lives trying to convince ourselves that Satan is not so big, and he ain't. And this story is given to us not to mock us, not to draw us out into some battlefield, to put our lives on the line and then God forsake us and leave us there. It's written for us to draw our hearts out, because many of us would tend to lead our lives in mediocrity and never step out, never step onto the battlefield, never step forward for Christ. But the thing that I look at here when I look at David is this. He had won a number of other battles first before he kills the giant. This is just the end. This is where we put all the emphasis. This is the crossing the finish line. This is the last brush stroke. He had won a number of other battles first. First one is familiarity. He comes to the battlefield and Eliab says, "Oh man, you punk kid, what are you doing here? You got wrong motives. You shouldn't be here. I know who you are. And I think one of the first battles that any of us have to have victory in is that one. Jesus said a prophet's not without honor except in his own house, amongst his own countrymen. And Jesus himself had to face that battle. And we can find fellowship with him there. Because there's that battle of the familiarity. It would just say to us, you're just a knucklehead. You'd just be happy you're saved and going to heaven. Please don't try to touch anything here. David had Samuel anoint him. The anointing was on his life, as it is on ours. And the first place where David won the battle was here. And instead of fighting there, you see, if all you want to do is fight, you don't even have to leave the camp, do you? You could have stayed home this morning and fought at home. If all we want to do is fight, we could do that at home. There's enough people there to tell us we ain't nothing. Paul said, henceforth we know no man after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Paul said we owe it to one another, to the body of Christ, when we look at each other, to realize you're looking at someone who's saved and sanctified and sealed with the Spirit of promise that has untold potential if they'll step out onto the water, leave the boat and walk on the water, if they'll trust Christ. That's where he won his first battle. I think the second battle he won is that battle of the expert, the logical mind, the natural mind. Saul said to him, and Saul was the expert. He was 7 foot tall. He was a warrior. You can't do this. You're just a kid. He's a warrior. Look out there. Are you blind? You see that mass of scintillating brass out there on the battlefield with the sun glistening? What do you think that is, a rock, a big nugget? That's a giant out there. You're just a kid. You're just in the natural. There's no way this can happen. You weigh, 150 pounds. He weighs 800 pounds. What are you going to do? Kick him in the shin, you'll break your foot. We have to win that battle. You don't have a degree. You don't have a certificate. You can't open your mouth for Christ. You can't be effective. You don't have what it takes. You're not qualified. All of those things that would keep us from stepping out. Oh, you have the anointing of God. The calling of God on your life. I think by the time he faced the voice of the giant and the insults of Goliath, that was just finishing. But remember, you can't do it in somebody else's armor. You can't be anybody but who you are. I love to read Whitefield and Spurgeon and Moody and see their lives and see what they did, but can't wear their armor. Can't wear their armor. There's a battle and a Goliath that we will all face alone. No counselor will be able to stand there with us. No pastor, no friend. It's by Ephes Damen. It's by the boundary of blood, where God's drawn a line in the sand and said, with the blood of his Son, and said, Satan, you can't cross this line. And you stand there in the name of the living God, and death can't touch you. But don't try to do it in somebody else's armor. You'd just be clunking around making a big mistake. Saul wanted to fight Goliath in the natural. He's got a sword, I got a sword. He's got a helmet, I got a helmet. He's got armor, I got armor. That's ridiculous. You see, because David had learned privately. And here's what I think that we need to take note of. He said, it was the Lord that delivered the lion and the bear into my hand. David had gone through a boot camp where there was no human being watching. I think how inclined I'd have been to just say to the lion, go on, it's only one lamb, just please leave. David, somehow, there, had worshiped the living God, had written songs about the living God, had experienced the living God, knew he was standing before the living God, knew the living God had parted the Red Sea, had parted the Jordan River, had destroyed armies. He was with the living God in his mind. And because of that, he takes hold of the beard of a lion, kills a bear. But those were lessons that were not electives. They're mandatory courses. They're learned in private. Pay great attention to what God is doing in your life behind the scenes where no human eye falls. David would sin there too, hidden from human eyes, and finally realized, Lord, before thee and thee only, in thy sight have I done this great sin, committed this wickedness. God's eyes are there. And by the time he walked onto that battlefield, the God that kills bears and the God that kills lions is the God that kills giants. There was no doubt. This, just the last brushstroke, was just the artist's signature down in the corner. The whole painting was there. The picture was clear. I want to encourage you. Whatever Goliaths you face in your life, you need to know this. You're not fighting for victory. You're fighting from victory. You're fighting from Ephes Daman, chapter 17, verse 1, the border of blood. Christ has paid for you, sealed you, you belong to him, you're indestructible. And yet we face these things. Sometimes in our character, sometimes in our forgiveness, sometimes with lust or anger or weakness or sickness, or these things somehow seem to rear up, their heads in front of us and look so imposing, and they're real when they come to us. And other people may not be able to relate, but we genuinely struggle, and we genuinely, sometimes we're afraid, and we look at it and we think, oh Lord. So pay great attention now in boot camp, in private. Because we'll have no victory in public that we haven't won privately first. And yet, I think God is beckoning us to step beyond our comfort zone, to step onto the battlefield, that 10,000 others might be encouraged to move forward. And your family may not agree with that, because they don't see who you are in Christ. The natural mind may not agree with that because you're not qualified. Your tendency may be to try to put on somebody else's armor. Oh, don't let that happen. Step forward in the name of the living God. Know his leading. Stand for his reputation. Be a Cassie Bernal, willing to stand up for the living God. I'm going to have the musicians come.